Oneohtrix Point Never Again album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning. Here tonight to chat about this latest album from Oneohtrix Point Never, aka Mr. Daniel Locrian. He has been at it for a couple of years now, to say the very least. He's been at it for some time. He is a modern obsession of mine, and maybe the electronic artist that I've listened to the most over the years, outside of like maybe Aphex Twin. But OPN, Daniel Locrian, Oneohtrix Point Never, whatever you want to call him, has really come a long way since being this outsider in his early days to being just about everywhere these days. It wasn't always like that, though. I mean, take for example his early material like Zones Without People, Betrayed in the Octagon, Russian Mind as well. These are all very chilly, very ambient, very lonely, desolate sounding electronic albums that are very short, but were all also compiled onto the Returnal compilation. If you haven't listened to these three records yet, definitely go out and do so. They are great. But ever since then, Oneohtrix Point Never, with every release, has just seemed to be getting more and more exposure. His very moody Experiment in Plunderphonics replica, this really kind of kicked off the next wave of his releases, where things started really picking up. I mean, critics and fans alike were looking and staring at every one of his releases, and most of them were really acclaimed all around. The R+7 was kind of campy and, I don't know, weird at times, a little spooky even, but it's also freaky and adventurous. And I could talk about Garden of Delete for hours. It's one of my all-time favorite albums. And Age of, while I feel like a lot of people were a little let down by this album, thought it was a little underwhelming, I thought it was a great sort of recap of just about every sound that Daniel had worked with over the last few years. Plus, I loved the inclusion of more vocals from him, and it had some great features from the likes of Prurient and Anoni. Now, the last time we heard from Daniel under the Oneohtrix Point Never name, it was 2020's magical Oneohtrix Point Never, which I liked. I liked a lot of this album. I thought it was a pretty solid album from him. The only thing that I had an issue with was, for one, I thought like the narrative of the album was just not that interesting and not nearly as good as it could have been. And I don't know, at the end of the day, I had consistency issues, especially when it came to like the interludes and just the flow of the album. And that's the last time that we've heard from Daniel in studio. But like I said, the guy is everywhere these days, whether it be his uncut gems and good time soundtracks or production and remix work. The guy is everywhere, which leads me to this latest album again. And you know what, for the most part, while I feel like some people may be let down by this once again, I feel like this is Daniel on cruise control, but in the best way. Early on in the album, we get tracks like Again and Instantly, I Am Home. I love the wiry synths on this track and just how cold and desolate this is. It sounds like something out of the R+7 era. And when Daniel takes his time with tracks like this and lets an atmosphere grow, it's magic. It's just magic. I love how busy this track is, even though it doesn't sound it from a distance. Like the racing synths and the layers of noise on this track just sound little out of reach, just out of your ear's reach. It makes for a really cool effect, and this track is everything I show up for. On the other hand, World Outside is a much busier, swirling track. It's intense, it's got a booming beat, the synths don't sit still, and I dare you to make them try. It's chilly, it's synthetic, it just sounds like you're being pummeled through Oneohtrix Point Never's psyche, this track. And I will say this, and this may come off as a hot take, but I do mean it, as far as Daniel's vocals go, which has been a hot debate in the Oneohtrix Point Never community. I actually think they've gotten a lot better, especially his songwriting. This track practically has a hook, and it's really memorable. All in all, it also has the immaculate production that you would expect from a project like this. Krumville, on the other hand, has some more organic instrumentation, which is something that Daniel's done for years, and I've always loved it. He just has a really classy way of doing it. I mean, the meditative, strummed acoustic riff pops so hard between this wall of synths and just this very glamorous production. but I mean that in the best way. This track is also one of the more progressive moments here. I love the vocal work, and I love the way that this track just moves from each kind of movement to the next. It's great stuff. So is Locrian mid-rest. I mean, it can't get much more icy than this. This is easily one of the coldest and most desolate tracks here. The pianos add an oddly human touch, and of course this wouldn't be a Oneohtrix Point Never album without some freaky vocal snippets that just seem haunted. Odd production choices too, but I mean that in the best way. It's all gravy. And the pacing here is just awesome. I love the way this track really creeps along. While this isn't the most explosive or game-changing album from Oneohtrix Point Never, once again, this to me sounds like a victory lap, but one in the best way, celebrating so many of his sounds. Including this truly epic finale, which sounds ripped out of Zones Without People. And Plastic Antique, all around, may be the best track on this entire project. This is the wonkiest and the weirdest thing on this entire record. Quote me on it. I mean, this thing is freaky as shit. This is the kind of experiment that I feel like a lot of people wanted out of this album, including myself. Between the numerous organic instrumentations and just the booming beat that we get here, the harsh production as well, the layers of production, the waves of synths, this, to me, is the most adventurous track here, and it's a real statement. I mean, obviously, Daniel is kind of out in the open more than ever as far as just his work goes. I mean, his sound is much more prominent now than it really ever has been, even if he's not as much of a pioneer these days. However, I will say this, the one thing that does upset me about this album, the few blemishes it does have, I am shocked by how bad they are. Like Elsewhere, as an intro, I don't know what happened here. The strings are here and they are aplenty, and this is something that Daniel has done a lot in the past with. But while it's classy, it's clashing hard. It's just a bunch of sounds ramming into one another, and it just sounds ugly. Later on in the album, we get the body trail. Wow, this is so unbelievably bad. This is one of the worst Oneohtrix Point Never tracks I've ever heard. There's little to no progression. The drama that's here does sound phoned in, and once again, everything just seems to be clashing into one another in a really ugly way. It's just not good at all, and the vocal samples he uses here, holy hell, they detract more than anything. I'm shocked. And on an axis, this one's just rough for me. On one hand, I salute how gloomy and human this track comes off. I do enjoy that. I mean, eventually we do get these crescendoing guitars that do take over in the final half and actually add some drama here and actually sound pretty cool. But outside of that, I'm shocked by how little this track progresses. I feel like it's a couple of minutes of nothing going on and then Daniel racing to just add something interesting for a finale. He's better than this. Outside of that, though, I'm going to be honest. This is not the most daring or bold album from Daniel, but I personally am just so addicted to his sound. I do really love this album. Nightmare Paint, I just love how lonely and tragic this track comes off. The beat is hard to place, the synths are so wonky, this just sounds so alien. There's quite a bit of drama on this track, and I love how subtle this track gets, which is something that's kind of been forgotten about in Daniel's music. Some of the live instrumentation is really nice as well, especially the guitar. Memories of Music, on the other hand, is shockingly emotional. It's a very tragic, drawn-out piece that has more emotions on display than I thought that possibly could. But between the MIDI synths and the otherworldly atmosphere, this is still very much a Oneohtrix Point Never track. It's a sound that sounds so familiar, yet so alien, and the way this track progresses, I mean, at points, it sounds like Daniel remixing moments from the Super Mario 64 soundtrack, and there's other moments that sound like it was ripped directly out of Uncut Gems. It's on the more progressive side from Oneohtrix Point Never, but I really love it. And especially towards the finale when things really do get very intense. And Ubiquity Road, I can't even believe I'm saying this. This is the dreariest of the dreary here. This may be the most genuinely lonely sounding track on this entire album, but it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's got this very seriously old school Angelo Badalamenti Twin Peaks soundtrack sound, layers of synths, desolate atmospheres, and it only gets better as this track rolls on. That's right, when the cosmic keyboards and the woodwinds pop in, this thing just really just hits home. It's one of the best tracks here. And A Barely Lit Path, as a finale, while initially I was a little thrown off by this track, it's truly an epic. It's a little bit longer, it definitely takes time to grow, but it's also really inviting, mostly because of Daniel's vocals here. They're freakish, of course, the inclusion of strings as well, but it makes these tracks like this really pop hard and just make them easier to take in. This feels like a genuine journey. This feels like a celebration. And in the final moments when those heady synths come in, I feel like we've come full circle. So yeah, is this the boldest or most game-changing album from Daniel Lopatin under any of his names? No, it is not. But I, for one, am just addicted to his sound, his production, the risks he is willing to take. And while, yes, I do believe that he can push himself further, this is a celebration of so many sounds of his, whether it be the synthy, desolate sounds of his early records or the more intense and experimental sounds that he's been working with lately. You're gonna find it all here. And yeah, it could be trimmed down a little bit, and it's not as bold as some of his biggest albums like Garden of Delete, but I'm addicted to his sound, and there's a lot of great, truly great electronic material on here. I'm feeling a light 8 on this album, but let me know what you all think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.